California Armageddon for landlords. These are very unprecedented times that we are going through. Most of America has experienced quite a bit of fear that's induced mostly by the media. If that wasn't enough, huge numbers of Americans are on unemployment, and many are fearful, and rightfully so, that when this is over, they won't have a full-time job to return to. But in the midst of all of this, here in California, I really hate to see our city and state politicians expressing empathy for the situation and then saying that they have a way to relieve some of the stress. Sure, that sounds good, but it's not the whole story, at least as far as it pertains to rental real estate in California. As far as the eviction ban, the state of California is using not their resources for the majority of this, but the landlord's rights and the landlord's money is being compromised. I'm sure most Californians already know that the governor instituted a moratorium on evictions and rent payments with an executive order that was supposed to end on May 31st. I read the executive order, and right after the May 31st date, there are two additional words, and they are, unless extended. I wrote about this before when it was first enacted, so I'm not going to go over those details again, but I will put a link in the bottom of this to that prior video, which you may want to look at. To briefly summarize what I said in the prior video was that neither the state government or the city officials where this moratorium is being enacted have made any provision for landlords to recover lost rent. About the only thing they say is that the tenant is not relieved from paying this rent and will still owe the rent. The whole thing should have been set up differently, where if the tenants are facing a hardship, they can apply to the state to get a voucher, and that would ensure that the landlord gets full rent payments from the state, and the tenant would owe this amount back rent to the state, and the state could make a payment plan with them instead of putting the burden of collection on the landlord. In an article that came out just last week, it was shown that just over 1/3 of the tenants did not make their April rent payment. Now, there's always some tenants who don't pay, but still the fact remains that for April, the amount of tenants who didn't pay jumped up significantly. So now you might be thinking that while these big landlords of multi-story apartment houses can just absorb any losses that they don't recover, but why should they have to? If the state of California has barred them from enforcing their legal rights of eviction. Sure, the tenant is still going to owe the full non-paid rent, but the tenant may just move out, and good luck tracking them down and hiring an attorney to try to recover money from someone who may not even be working or who has actually moved out of the state. Sure, there's always a risk of rent non-payment on any rental, but should this happen, most landlords within a few days or a week or so would start eviction proceedings. The quicker they start these proceedings, the less income the landlord could potentially lose. So you should keep in mind that many single-family home rentals are homes that the current landlord originally lived in before they moved on to a more suitable property. They kept their original property as an investment, kind of like a 401k, and the way to help them pay off the mortgage on that property. Now a number of mortgage lenders have said that they will cooperate with waiving late fees and extending time for the normal monthly mortgage payments. But with that said, I have not read anywhere where a mortgage lender said they are going to forgive these payments. Maybe a mom and pop residential property landlord was hoping they could get through this if it just ran until May 31st as the governor's executive order stated. But just the other day, the Judicial Council of California, I never heard of them before, but I looked them up, and they are the people who make the rules that govern the courts in California. This council issued an emergency order that affects all landlords in California. I'm not going to get into all the details here, but basically what the emergency order says is that it prohibits summons for unlawful detainers, prohibits default judgments, and postpones all trials for 60 days from the initial date of the trial, and that no trial may be set any earlier than 60 days after the request for a trial has been made. So I'm sure you're thinking now, well, this is just part of the governor's executive order that expires on May 31st unless extended. But if you're thinking that, you're probably entirely wrong. Okay, here it comes, and this is verbatim from the order. The emergency order remains in effect for at least 90 days after the governor lifts the state of emergency or until amended by the Judicial Council. The Judicial Council order will likely be in effect through August. I think it's pretty easy to interpret and understand what this says. Now, you must understand that I am not an attorney, I'm not a financial advisor, so please don't take any action on this information until you've checked with your own attorney or financial advisor. Okay, now with that out of the way, it seems to me that if Governor Newsom lets his order barring evictions and foreclosures expire as stated on May 31st, California landlords would still have to wait a minimum of 60 days to try and get an unlawful detainer. In my area of San Diego, many single-family homes easily rent for $2,000 or more a month. So assuming that one's tenant doesn't make a payment starting in April, and the moratorium by the governor is lifted on May 31st, the landlord would have to wait an additional 60 days before they can file for unlawful detainer. Keep in mind that 60 days is just for filing of the unlawful detainer. And as the Judicial Council of California states in their emergency order, no trial may be set any earlier than 60 days after the request for trial is made. So it seems to me that for some landlords who did not receive payment from their tenants starting in April, they would be 4 months behind before they could even file for an unlawful detainer. And if they had to go to trial to get the tenant out, that would be a minimum of another 60 days. So in reality, it could very well end up being that the tenant lives rent-free for 5 or 6 months or more and ends up owing the landlord over $12,000. Like I said before, this is just my interpretation, and I could be wrong, so one should again do their own investigation and talk with their own legal professional. What I'm going to do is to post part of this notice in the text below, and so fellow Californians can review it. I have also put a link below to the Judicial Council's emergency order, so you can review that and draw your own conclusions, or at the very least, forward it to your own attorney or financial advisor and get their opinion. At one time, I actually had 3 or 4 rentals here in San Diego. I'm sure glad with what's happening now that I don't own any rental properties. Actually, I'm hoping that my interpretation of this new emergency order is also totally wrong, because if not, this is sure going to be a terrific blow for all the mom-and-pop single-family home landlords, as well as landlords throughout the state of California. So, before this was all put in place, the landlord could start proceedings when they were just a month behind. That would greatly limit their loss. Now, because of the state's action, their loss is going to be, or potentially going to be, tremendous. And a lot of, I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, and that's fine. I think a lot of human nature is going to be that, hey, look, if I owe $10,000, $12,000, maybe we should just move out of here. And I think that's going to be not only horrific for the landlords, but I think it's going to be a dramatic downturn in income property sales here in California because of this. People are just going to get fed up with this, and they're going to want to dump their properties because they're afraid that perhaps if this or something like this comes back in the future, the same thing is going to happen to them. Anyway, like I said before, I hope I'm wrong in interpretation of this, and please read the notes in the text below so you can look at this emergency order yourself and draw your own conclusions. Hey, thanks for watching. For information about the current condition of the San Diego residential real estate market, be sure to visit brokerforyou.com. The 4 is FOR and the U is YOU. Hey, thanks.